The night before the divorce, he laid an envelope on the bed and said, "Don't open this if you want to live." Julian delivered the line in his trademark velvety half-whisper, the one that used to make my knees weak but now made bile rise in my throat. He didn't wave a gun, he didn't scream, and he didn't throw a punch. He simply lowered the thick, craft paper rectangle onto the pristine white duvet with 2 fingers, delicately, as if leaving a tip for housekeeping in a 5-star hotel. October rain lashed against the window with a headache-inducing persistence, and the bedroom reeked of his cologne, sandalwood and cold steel. I stared at the envelope, feeling a shard of ice expand in my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, offered a slight smirk, that barely their smile our friends always mistook for infinite patience, and walked out, closing the door soundlessly behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silence, leaving me alone with the paper monster lying on our marital bed. What was it? Blackmail? A suicide note? Or proof that I really had lost my mind, just as he'd been claiming for the last 2 years? I stood frozen in the center of the room, terrified to even approach the bed, shaking as if the building's heat had been cut, though the thermostat read a perfect 72 degrees. Every detail of the interior we had chosen together now looked like a set piece from a horror movie. The flawless eggshell walls, the sterile cleanliness, the absence of clutter, it was all his achievement, his order, his cage. I remembered how, a week ago, I found my favorite face cream in the trash simply because I hadn't screwed the lid on tight enough. "You're becoming sloppy, Alice," he had said, looking at me with pity. "These are the early signs of depression." And I believed him. I always believed him. But tonight, looking at that envelope, for the first time I felt not guilt, but a wild, primal fear mixed with curiosity. If I opened it, he would know. Julian always knew. He read me like an open book, anticipating every step, every word. The phrase, "if you want to live," spun in my head like a broken record. Did he mean physical death? Or was he talking about the pathetic remnant of my personality that was still flickering inside? Julian was an architect not just by profession, but by nature. He constructed realities in which everyone around him was cast as an obedient extra. Tall, with impeccable posture and a gaze that seemed to scan you for structural defects, he was my mother's favorite and my colleague's best friend. "You're so lucky to have him, Alice, he puts you on a pedestal," they would say, never noticing that his grip was tightening every year, turning an embrace into a chokehold. He never hit me. In 5 years of marriage, not a single bruise on my body was by his hand. His violence was quiet, sterile, invisible to the outside world. It existed in disappearing car keys that would later turn up in my purse, in changed passwords that I had supposedly forgotten, in endless insinuations about my incompetence, my forgetfulness, my hysteria. He convinced me to quit my job because I was too tired and making mistakes. He drove my friends away because they were bad influences jealous of our happiness. And now, when by some miracle I found the strength to file for divorce, he had decided to play one last game. I took a step toward the bed, feeling the carpet give softly under my bare feet, and reached for the envelope, but recoiled at the last second as if from a hot stove. The texture of the paper was coarse, I could see that even from a distance. There was something inside, not just a single sheet, but a stack. Money? Unlikely, he had frozen my cards yesterday, citing a necessary audit before the hearing. Photos? Compromising material? But what dirt could there be on a woman who hadn't left the house without her husband in 2 years? I froze, listening to the sounds of the apartment. From the living room came the muffled drone of the TV. He was watching the news as if nothing were happening. That sound of normalcy was the most terrifying part. He was sitting there, sipping his sugar-free espresso, waiting for me to break. If I opened the envelope, I violated his prohibition. If I didn't, I would go insane from the uncertainty before morning. It was a trap, a classic fork. Any move I made led to defeat. I grabbed the envelope by the corner, careful not to leave prints, and weighed it in my hand. Heavy. About 7 ounces of pure terror. Suddenly, a memory from 3 years ago surfaced. We had just moved into this apartment, our concrete paradise, as he joked. While he was away on a business trip, I decided to surprise him by painting one wall in the study a deep emerald green. I thought he'd like it, he appreciated complex shades. When Julian returned, he didn't yell. He just stood and stared at the wall for 20 minutes without blinking. Then he turned to me and asked quietly, with genuine pain in his voice, "Why do you want to ruin everything, darling? Don't you see this color makes the space look sick? You don't even notice how you destroy the harmony around you." The next day, a crew repainted the wall a sterile gray, and I spent a week seeing the therapist he recommended to work through my destructive impulses. Now, clutching the envelope, I realized, it wasn't about the wall color. It was about who had the right to alter our reality. And that right belonged solely to him. I decided not to open it. Not now. It was my first small rebellion, my first conscious choice in years, not to play by his rules, but to create my own, however crooked. I didn't hide the envelope in the nightstand where he'd find it, nor under the mattress. I went into the walk-in closet, stood on my tiptoes, and shoved it into a box of old winter boots I hadn't worn in 3 years. Julian hated old things, he wouldn't look there. My heart was hammering in my throat, my palms slick with sweat. I returned to the bedroom, killed the lights, and pulled the covers over my head. I heard him pacing the apartment, the refrigerator door opening, the clink of glass. He was patrolling the territory. Half an hour later, he entered the bedroom. I feigned sleep, controlling my breathing, though my insides were twisted into a tight knot. He stood by the bed, and I could feel his gaze on my skin. He was looking for the envelope. Seeing it gone, he let out a short hum, a sound of satisfaction. He assumed I had opened it, panicked, and destroyed it. Or hidden it to reread in horror. Either way, he believed the mechanism was in motion. Morning met me with a leaden sky and a headache that pulsed in my temples like a second, angry life. Court was at 11. Julian behaved impeccably. He made breakfast, watery oatmeal and green tea, just how you like it, though I hated oatmeal. He was dressed in a navy suit that fit him like a second skin, looking fresh, rested, and powerful. In the mirror, I saw a ghost, pale skin, dark circles, trembling hands. "Are you ready, Alice?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. There was no hostility in his voice, only the concern of a big brother for a dim-witted sister. "Maybe I should call your lawyer and say you're unwell? We can postpone." It was a test. He wanted to see if the hook with the envelope had worked. I forced myself to straighten my spine, buttoned my coat, and said firmly, "No. We're going now." His eyebrow twitched ever so slightly. He hadn't expected resistance. I called my sister while he was warming up the car. Jane had always treated Julian with cautious admiration, considering him the ideal man who had pulled me out of the swamp. "Are you sure you want to do this, Alice?" Her voice sounded anxious over the phone. "He tries so hard. Maybe it's just a crisis. You know how you get mood swings." Even my own sister spoke in his phrases. Julian had permeated my entire circle like mold in drywall. "Jane, just keep your phone on, okay? If I don't call you by 1 o'clock, call the police," I blurted out and hung up before she could start lecturing me. I got into the car, surrounded by the smell of leather and that specific air freshener that always made me nauseous. Julian put on classical music. Vivaldi. The Four Seasons, Winter. How ironic. We pulled out of the driveway, and I noticed he was driving a little more aggressively than usual, taking the corners sharp. Halfway to the courthouse, while we were stuck in traffic on the bridge, he suddenly turned and placed his hand on my knee. His palm was hot and heavy. "You opened it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I stared straight ahead at the brake lights of the truck in front of us. "No," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Alice, lying isn't good. You know deception destroys trust. And in court, trust is everything." He squeezed my knee harder, to the point of pain. "Inside that envelope is what can save you from disgrace. Or destroy you. The choice is yours." In that moment, I understood, the envelope didn't just contain blackmail. It contained his script for today. If I didn't know what was in it, I was walking into a minefield blindfolded. But if I opened it now, I lost his game. I didn't open it, Julian. And I'm not going to. I don't care what you've cooked up. He jerked his hand away and laughed. It was a dry sound, like snapping twigs. Well then. So much the worse for you. We parked at the courthouse. I stepped out, my legs threatening to give way under the tension. I needed a bathroom. Urgently. Be right back, I threw over my shoulder and ran for the entrance without waiting for him. In the stall, with shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. I had 5 minutes. I had to figure out what he was planning. But how? Suddenly, it hit me. I remembered that last night, when he placed the envelope on the bed, his phone screen had lit up with a cloud sync notification. We shared an account which he, in his arrogance, hadn't bothered to lock me out of, assuming I was too stupid to understand technology. I opened the app. Recent uploads. A folder named Project Finale. I opened it. And the world tilted. They weren't photos. They were scans of medical evaluations. Fake evaluations. Stamped with the seal of a psychiatric clinic where his college friend worked. I scrolled through the documents on the tiny screen, tears of rage blurring my vision. According to these papers, I suffered from severe schizophrenia, was suicidal, and posed a danger to society. There were logs of my episodes, dated to match our vacations, dinner parties, quiet nights at home. He had been keeping this diary for 2 years. Every argument we had was documented as a psychotic break. Every tear I shed, hysteria. But the most terrifying part was at the end. A draft of a statement to the court, where I allegedly admitted my incompetence and requested Julian be appointed my legal guardian. That's what was in the envelope. He wanted me to read it, to be terrified by the sheer weight of the evidence he had manufactured, and to sign the papers myself to avoid public humiliation. He was banking on my fear. Banking on me believing that I couldn't stand against such a machine. He wanted to break me before we even entered the courtroom. I left the bathroom after splashing ice-cold water on my face. In the mirror, a woman with red eyes but lips pressed into a thin line looked back at me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, ringing hatred. I realized one important thing: he had overestimated himself. He was so confident in his control that he had made a mistake. One of the incident reports was dated August 15th of last year. He wrote that I had run around the apartment with a knife. But on August 15th, I was with my mother in the hospital in another city, and I had witnesses, doctors, nurses, visitor logs. He had forgotten because, for him, my life outside his presence didn't exist. This tiny detail brought his entire perfect construction crashing down. A house of cards built on lies, shaking from a single breath of truth. I walked into the corridor where he was waiting, leaning casually against the wall and scrolling through a tablet. Seeing me, he feigned sympathy. Did you cry? My poor girl. Maybe we should go home? I'll handle everything. I walked right up to him. He smelled of confidence and expensive tobacco. I looked him straight in the eyes, holding his gaze for the first time in months. No, Julian. We're going into the courtroom. And you know what? I did open the envelope. Mentally. His face froze for a second, the mask of virtue cracking. And what did you see? He hissed through gritted teeth. I saw you losing, I whispered, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The trial was like a surrealist play. His lawyer, a slick character with an oily smile, began laying down their cards. He spoke of my instability, of how Julian heroically endured my outbursts. Julian sat with his head bowed, playing the grieving husband forced to take extreme measures to save his beloved. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a tired face, listened intently. I felt the noose tightening. But when it was my turn to speak, I didn't make excuses. I simply took out my phone and asked to submit the cloud files into evidence, along with a request for my phone's location data and the hospital records for August 15th. Your Honor, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, my husband is a talented architect. But he doesn't just build buildings, he builds lies. And today, I want to demolish his best project. Julian's face in that moment was worth years of humiliation. It turned gray. He started whispering frantically to his lawyer, gesturing wildly. His perfect composure evaporated. When the judge began reviewing the date discrepancies, and when it became clear the medical certificates were forgeries, I had managed to email a request to the clinic through my lawyer right before the session, and the reply was instant. They had issued no such records. The stamp was fake. Julian jumped up. She's lying. She hacked my phone. It's a setup, he screamed, his voice cracking into a falsetto. It was over. His scream, his hysteria, that was the real proof of his instability. He had exposed himself. In trying to paint me as the crazy one, he revealed his true face. That evening, I returned to the apartment to pack. Julian was sitting in the kitchen in the dark. A bottle of whiskey, half empty, stood before him. The envelope was still in the box with the boots. I knew it was there, but now it was just trash. I walked past him without a word. He lifted his head. His eyes were red and empty. You won't survive without me, he rasped. You're nothing. A blank space. I stopped in the doorway, suitcase in hand. You know, Julian, I answered without turning around. I opened the envelope. Inside was my freedom. And it doesn't smell like your cologne. It smells like rain. I walked out of the apartment, leaving my keys on the side table. 6 months have passed. I live in a tiny studio on the outskirts of town where the faucet drips and the upstairs neighbors love blasting rock music at night. But it's my water and my rock music. I work in a small bookstore, making peanuts, but every cent is mine. Yesterday, I got a notification that Julian received a suspended sentence for document forgery and a restraining order. Jane finally apologized, though I still see the bewilderment in her eyes. How could I trade a golden cage for this poverty? But she misses the point. Sometimes at night, I dream of that envelope. In the dream, I open it, and black birds fly out to peck at my eyes. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. But then I turn on the night light and look at my hands, calloused, manicure-free, but alive. I make myself coffee, strong, with sugar, the way I like it, not the way that's healthy. I walk to the window. Outside the glass, snow is falling. A clean, white sheet. I take a marker and write on the glass, I survived. And that is the only truth that matters. Today, I found the actual envelope in the pocket of the old coat I had grabbed in a rush that day. I had completely forgotten that at the last second, I'd moved it from the boots to my pocket. I finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Absolutely blank. No letters, no numbers, no photos. It was his final joke. He knew I would torment myself, guess, and fear the contents. He was selling me fear out of nothing, air packaged in craft paper. I laughed, loudly, uncontrollably, until tears ran down my face. I laughed as I tore that blank sheet into tiny pieces, letting them fall to the floor like the snow outside. It was empty. It had always been empty. But I was full. And now I knew for sure, the story didn't end when we got divorced. It ended right now, when I realized the monster under the bed was just a shadow cast by a coat hanger.